Hello and welcome back. If you're listening to the audio, if you're listening to the video, welcome from the very beginning to another episode of Five Alarm Task Force. We're happy to have you with us. Happy to be here with you. I'm your host, Steve Green. And joining me today, I'm going to say this, and I'm going out a little bit on a limb, but these are three of the most important people dealing with a topic we're addressing again today. I actually had to put it in a blog post about a month ago, and that is the incidents of struck-bys. Now, we're using that struck by as a term, but this is referring to our firefighters, our police officers, our EMS people, our road rangers, and even our recovery tow operators are being struck and severely injured or killed by what we call now in our little group, the D drivers. And I'm going to tell you just a start of what D refers to: drunk, drugged, drowsy, distracted, disgruntled, disturbed, disrespectful, drag racers, driverless, thank you, Mr. Yes, and dangerous. And that doesn't even include those who are dead. So we know that recently we had a firefighter lose his life in Ohio, not too long ago. We had another, I believe it was an off-duty firefighter, was struck while assisting at a scene. So our first guest is Jack Sullivan. Joining me today, I should say, not just our first. Joining me today from Responder Safety Institute, Jack Sullivan and Todd Leiss, and from Hass Alert, and you see this on almost all our posts on Twitter and Instagram, is Brock on from Hass Alert. And we're going to be kind of covering what's going on, where we are, and what we're looking for, maybe in the not too distant future. So, Jack, we're going to start with you. I believe you're still the director of education for Responder Safety Institute.
Yep, that's what they tell me. Although I seem to be more of a chief cook and bottle washer, and anything that comes down the pipe, they usually hand to me. And my challenge is to hand it off to somebody else if I can.
Okay, there you go.
All things flow downhill to Todd, for starters.
Okay.
And I try to pass them on to somebody else.
Right. We want to mention that Todd, besides working as an instructor with Responder Safety Institute, he is also, I can't remember the full title, Todd, with the Pennsylvania Turnpike Authority. That I know.
Yep. So I'm the traffic incident management coordinator. So I manage the fire, EMS, and towing contracts for the Pennsylvania Turnpike across the 567 miles of turnpike.
Right. And if you've never driven from Ohio to Pennsylvania, Eastern Pennsylvania, it's a long ass haul. Okay. And we used to live in Cincinnati with family in Philadelphia, family in Albany, and family in Boston. So we know what that long, and I remember up by Washington, Pennsylvania, that turnpike in those days, yeah, they have 6 extra spare tires on just a regular passenger vehicle just to get through some of those potholes. But that's all been fixed over the years, thankfully. And as I mentioned, Brock on is with Hass Alert, and we'll be getting to him in just a minute. So, Jack, tell us, where are we at this moment as we're coming together to discuss this topic for our viewers and listeners, please?
Well, you mentioned at the beginning that we're not seeing a reduction. I think a little bit of a victory for us these days is that we're not seeing a dramatic increase in the last 4 years. The numbers have been hanging a little bit steady. 2021 was a little bit of an anomaly. It jumped up pretty high. We had 65 fatalities in 2021, but it dropped back down to 50 or 51 last year. Either way, over the last 4 years, we've seen 206 emergency responders struck and killed at incident scenes, which is a pretty significant number to those of us in the business, obviously. But it's a number that we need more of the drivers out there to understand. And one of the things that we've started to focus on is we've done, I won't say everything that we can from a training perspective for the responders themselves, but the area that's not being addressed real well is changing the behavior of those D drivers that you mentioned that are out there on the roads and highways. So we're starting to focus a little bit more on our community risk reduction activities and trying to get more to those drivers, in addition to continuing our efforts to provide high quality training for the emergency responders that are out there on the street. And I think one of the things that we keep reminding ourselves is, even though I've been talking about this subject now for, in the month of March, it'll be 25 years at this point that we've been addressing this subject. We still have turnover in the various disciplines that we work with. So there's a lot of people who have not heard the message about traffic incident management and roadway incident safety that are in the business. There are new recruits that are coming into career fire departments and EMS agencies. There are new volunteers that are signing up around the country in the fire EMS agencies. We've got law enforcement hiring people as fast as they can because of the lack of staff nationwide. And everybody's got a need for employees or employment event sign out in front of their business on the private sector side for teleoperators and the road service technicians and whatnot that we're dealing with. And even DOTs are having trouble with staffing. So there's new responders coming into the mix on a regular basis. So we've got to continue to provide the level of instruction that we can for them. But I think the forgotten group that we need to spend more time talking to directly are those drivers that are out on the street, especially the younger drivers who are just getting their learner's permit and driver's license for the first time. They've spent the last probably 16 years watching their parents drive and learning all the bad habits they could from them. We need to somehow or other try to find a way to influence the way they at least drive around emergency vehicles out on the roadway, whether they're stopped and parked at an incident scene or actually in the process of responding to an emergency. We've got to do a better job of training those drivers what we need them to do when they're around emergency vehicles. And that's one of the things that we're focusing on. So the fact that the numbers are hanging somewhere between 45 and 51 in some ways is extremely frustrating, but at the same time, the fact that that's not 105 a year or 205 a year tells me that we're having some success. As much as we don't want to see the numbers climb, we also don't want to see them stay steady, and we'd like to drive those numbers down. And we're working as hard as we can, the three of us, and the different disciplines that we're working with on a regular basis. And those people we hope will pick up the message and carry it on to others. We're far better off now on this subject than we were 25 years ago. There's no question about that. And as frustrated as we get on a regular basis, I have to remind people, sometimes we've got to look over our shoulder and see where we were 25 years ago, 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 5 years ago. We're in a far better place now than we were before. The big difference is the type of drivers that we're dealing with are very different now than they were 25 years ago, too.
Right. As are the makes and the creation of automobiles today.
Yeah.
Right. You know, better soundproofing, better tinting. You know, one of the things that I think irks me the most, and I guess it's thanks to lots of cameras we have now, and we have a lot more opportunity through video to see some of these accidents. And I've seen
We don't call them accidents anymore. We call
right, exactly. Collisions, right. MVCs, not MVAs.
We tend not to use that term accident anymore. It's always a
Right.
crash.
Yeah, exactly. No, you're right. That's right. That was my old school from 45 years ago when I was have to stand in the middle of I-40 in Greensboro, North Carolina, not knowing, you know, no vests, no flashlights with cones, but we just, you know, we're out there on the interstate, and it was. I mean, you know, when I first started in October '77, I mean, my first call was on the interstate was like 3 weeks later, and I was petrified out there.
Mm-hmm.
I was petrified out there on I-40 in Greensboro, very busy east-west link there, and the semis weren't slowing down, cars weren't slowing down. But one thing that really ticks me off right now is when we've seen a couple of these where there has been video basically at the scene, and when the police are right there. And of course, in the last couple of weeks, we saw that major one. I believe it was in Maryland, I'm not sure, but I remember where the police officers, the video opens up with the police officers walking to the side of the car with the person, and everything was fine. But somebody comes across from the passing 3 lanes over, comes right across and hits the furthest away car, which hit the troopers and the driver, but not with such force because it was kind of offset. But when the people say, "Oh, I didn't see that," or when the officer says, "Don't you know you're supposed to move over for emergency lights?" I don't know. Why would I know that? Okay. Why would I know that? All right. Now, on the other good side of it, as I watch a lot of these videos,
law in every state in the country.
exactly, it's a state law in every law, and every state has the signs.
You're supposed to know what the driving laws are.
Exactly. However, what I am seeing is that I'm seeing our emergency responders really going out of their way, even if they have to walk further, going out of their way to block these scenes with two. Now it used to be just one apparatus. Now we're seeing them use 2 and 3 apparatus to block a nice safety V to direct them away from the actual thing. Not a guarantee, but the more space we give, the more, I guess I call it bumper room, that less of a chance that it's going to push down that further. So starting them further away from the scene to get the traffic slowing down a little bit earlier, I think is a really good thing for us to see that our brothers and sisters in all these services are doing, trying to play their role to the best part they can.
Yeah.
Todd, what are you seeing with the turnpike?
That actually occurred in Wyoming with the tractor trailer that came into the incident scene on the shoulder area.
Mm-hmm. So, Steve, Jack hit the nail on the head. It's frustration. We see frustration. And in Pennsylvania last year, we had 4 emergency responders struck and killed, despite of all the efforts that we've been doing to try to make and improve safety. And my leadership reached out to me and they said, we know you're frustrated. We know you're pissed off. We know you're depressed about this. And they said they wanted to make sure I was okay. And I said, I am. Because I think of all the efforts that we're doing, that how many would we have had struck and killed if we're not doing what we're doing?
Right.
And so I try to look at it in that space, but it's still, what Jack brought it up, and Steve, you brought up, I joined the fire service in 1982. I've been around and you've been on the roadway, and driver behavior changed. I guess what I get frustrated on is not only the D drivers that we see out there, but when we ourselves and other responders are part of the problem, and being those D drivers and being those doing some of the things, and we all want to complain. And I asked in every TIM class, traffic incident management class I teach, and I taught 2 the last 2 days, and I'm teaching 1 tonight. I say, how many of us are D drivers? And I raised my hand, and everybody just looks at me, and I said, well, who eats in the car and drives? Who talks on the phone and drives? Who does this and that in the car? And then more and more hands get raised up, and it's like, okay, we're part of the problem, And I said, who has talked to their family, your kids, your wife, your relatives about distracted driving and move over? And not one of them. And it's like, you have to be the voice. If you're not talking to the people that are in your network, how are we going to get beyond our network? I had a guy Sunday that I taught the class, and he was, Jack, I'm sure you've had many people in the class, that he was angry at the world. And he's like, the move over law doesn't work. And it's like, okay, well, I said, who have you talked to about the move over law within the past week, past month, past year? Anybody? No, because it doesn't work. Well, if you keep your mouth shut and just complain whenever I come to teach a class, I know what the problem is. You know what the problem is. Have you talked to your family, your friends, and no. So, I said, if you're going to be pissed off at the whole class, that's okay. I'll treat you the way you treat me, but, and it will be a long class, but, and he changed his attitude, doing the class because we talked about it. But it's we have to change our culture. We have to change our own behavior if we expect the public to change their behavior, and we have to demonstrate that we're doing that and advocate and be the voice. Otherwise it's not going to work. Right.
Very good. And my both our daughters and our son-in-law are grown adults, but I have spoken to the three of them about this. They know how important this is to me, what it means to me. When they walk into the house from outside, one of the helmets they see in the wrought iron shelving at the front door is my former EMS helmet when I worked with EMS in North Carolina. And they said, when you have to wear that, if you were doing, EMT and paramedic work, I said, every response, if we run 33 traffic, or what we call 33 traffic, which is lights and sirens in North Carolina, we were required by organizational policy, we must wear our helmets. And it was a fireable offense if we didn't, if a supervisor saw us with lights and sirens and we weren't wearing it. And, what do you mean they would fire you? I said, yes. Why? Because we're in the modular ambulances and there's, kind of a little top heavy and they can go over. And when we run an emergency, they required us. And I said, when I was offered just even a temporary position, he said, are you okay with it, Steve? He goes, we know, you work with the fire service. That's why they want me to offer you this part-time position as a fill-in. But are you okay with it? I said, I have no problem with it. I'm not going to go into a fire or respond to a traffic accident in an engine company not wearing my helmet. So why would I not wear it, in the ambulance? And so the kids know how serious this is for me and for our family. And I said, and I told them about I-40 in Greensboro, what it was like. And my buddy who was here, he's told them as well. The guy I met, he's still my best friend today. And it's something that they've tried to pass on to their friends. And my older daughter said, I don't know if they even listen to me. I said, that's all right, honey. As long as you're trying, that's what's important. So don't give up.
Absolutely. Keep to your convictions. And, I've told state police leadership before that if you have a policy that you're not enforcing as far as high-vis and PPE, then you don't have a policy. If you just say, oh, well, we have a policy, but nobody's following it. You're the leadership. You need to get out there and make sure that, enforce the policy. Otherwise, it's not a policy. You might as well just tear it up and, throw it away.
Exactly. All right, Ron, let's turn to you for a moment here. Now, while Jack is very much aware of, Jack and Todd are very much aware of overall, but what is your sense? What do you pick up in the industry before we talk about specifically about Hassler? What are you hearing? Do we have other companies that are as dedicated to the task as Hassler is?
Oh, certainly. I mean, we are not alone in this effort. I mean, frankly, we've learned so much from our partnership with the Responder Safety Institute and the responders that we work with across the country. Our solution was developed with the guidance of responders on the ground who helped us understand how a digital alert should work, who digital alerts should be received by, how we optimize them to keep drivers focused on the road. We benefit from partnerships with manufacturers of emergency vehicles who place priority on safety above all else. Because they know that is what departments are expecting when they invest in these assets and equipment. So by no means are we on our own in this battle. I think that what makes us unique is that we believe that education, enforcement, and the things that have been done so far, what we call analog alerting now, are critical components that need more support. We know now. I'll give you some points here.
Sure.
On the issue of enforcement, 20 years ago, there weren't move-over laws, and now we have move-over laws in every single state. That didn't happen overnight, and it didn't happen in isolation. It happened because of coordinated efforts on the ground in each state, oftentimes led by first responders, to make that a law. When it comes to education, 20 years ago, 15 years ago, the number of drivers that actually knew that the move over law was a law ranked under about a third. And we have polling from the National Safety Council from just a couple of years ago that shows us that now up to 90% of drivers say that they're at least somewhat familiar with the move over law. And that is a direct result of the Responder Safety Institute, who just consistently puts this message out in every community that they can. But what we know is that they are fighting against, as Todd and Jack have already said, and you've identified, you're fighting against vehicles that are quieter than ever, drivers that have more distractions and more basically on their mind than ever before. These highways, people are traveling at very, very fast speeds, at high rates of speeds. Now we have vehicles that claim to be autonomous that are not truly autonomous, that are on the road and putting people in danger. So the truth is that, at Haas Alert, we come at this from the perspective of what we need is a better way to get the attention of drivers in the critical moment when they are approaching an active hazard that they're not expecting. And this is something that requires coordination across the transportation ecosystem. You can't just put that responsibility on responders or just put that responsibility on automakers or just drivers. We are all in this together.
Right.
We'd like to believe that digital alerting is the tool that accomplishes that. And the great thing is that it gives agencies, automakers, communities actions that they can take today to prioritize this. One thing I want to point out, just today, just before I joined before we recorded this, we just got a report out today that showed the preliminary data from the first half of 2022 shows that pedestrian traffic fatalities are up. There were 3,434 people killed on the side of the road in the first half of 2022. So it's not just responders. These are our members of our community. And one thing that we don't talk about is that every time a responder steps out of their vehicle and they're on the road, that is a pedestrian. Right. They are a vulnerable road user and special privileges and roles, but fundamentally, this is a pedestrian on the side of the road. So those 3,434 people could have all been responders. The only difference is that responders invest immense amount of time and effort and resources in broadcasting their location to approaching drivers. They're doing everything they can to get the attention of these drivers. And yet we know that despite their best efforts, we continue to fail to achieve the benefits that we want to see on the road. And so this is why we'd like to believe that digital alerting is in a place to hopefully play a really supporting role in addressing this problem.
Right, as do we. I mean, really, I'm happy with any technology and educational programs that we can give, yes, to our responders, because we still know that there are responders who don't, who might not be paying as much attention when they arrive on scene as they should. When we did that webinar a little over a year ago, and we started off with Chief Richard Gassaway because of his theme of teaching situational awareness matters, SAM, and he stressed that, as did all of our speakers that evening. And we were talking to our people with that, and our hope was that if not, they didn't walk away with anything else, they came away with the idea that I have to have my head on a swivel as I'm starting to get off that apparatus, whether it's a pumper, whether it's a ladder, whether it's a quint, whether it's a heavy rescue, utility vehicle, whatever it is. When I open my door, from that second on, I need to be my own advocate, and I have to have my head on a swivel and know my situational awareness. Now, if a distracted driver is 3/4 of a mile down the road, still has before the accident scene, and this responder gets out, and he or she are careful, they're looking both ways, they're keeping an eye out. And now I've seen some people are setting up actually watchers, lookouts at one end of it, so that they're going to see earlier if somebody's looking like they're going to be coming over to that side, not moving over, which I think is good. But again, it still may be putting even the lookout at some risk. But the fact is, we're trying everything that we can humanly possible between what the Institute teaches, Brock, what you and Corey are doing at HazAlert, and the other companies are trying to do. But if, you can only, as I used to say about the former nonprofit business I used to run, businesses I ran, was that, you're going to bang your head against the wall once in a while. You just don't expect you're going to need daily brain surgery. and that's what we're seeing, I feel, still with this, that yes, we do get our message across to some very good people, and hopefully a lot of those are our brothers and sisters, first responders, so that they know, first things first, take care of yourself. Be aware of where you are at all times, whether it's as we promoted on that webinar. I don't care if it's a 2-lane country road or it's 12 lanes interstate. Makes no difference, because the chance is still there that if you block that 2-lane country road, someone's going to want to get by that, because what they have to do is more important than any accident or any fatality you're dealing with, because they're more important than everything else. And they're going to come through anyway.
The only thing that I would say in response to that, Steve, is it's absolutely true that the first step of this is responders, when there is a hazard on the road and they are coming to address it, obviously establishing a safe response zone, and taking every step they can. The challenge is that what we're talking about here, putting out extra blocker engines, putting out spotters, keeping your head on a swivel. First of all of those things take away from their ability to actually focus on the incident at hand, which is what they really want to do.
Very true.
Want to care for the people that are there. And the other thing is that none of those things are so much prevention, like collision prevention techniques. They're almost like reduction of damage, right? If you see a driver coming and you jump out of the way, you didn't prevent a collision, you just avoided getting killed.
Right.
And so this is where we came to this, where, it's not enough to tell responders that in addition to shouldering the entire burden of protecting themselves, protecting the people that were involved in this, and protecting the approaching drivers, that they also have to be at all times watching for something barreling at them at 80 miles an hour. It's an unfortunate reality. And because of the fact that we are all, the customers that we serve, and especially the three of you on this discussion, what I love about this industry is that there's a lot of radical honesty. And if we're being radically honest, the fact that we have to accept over 40,000 deaths on the road every year is preposterous, absurd, and depressing to me. It's not acceptable, right? And we have to get to a point where we understand that if we can pump things like Netflix and Angry Birds into people's vehicles, then surely we can get them information about hazards that they're approaching so that they can make better and safer decisions.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And so it takes all of us.
Right. And I think one way is, one of the things that bothers me and I don't have it on my cars, and I'm very happy I don't, which is the ability to connect the video to the infotainment display. I don't believe that should be available, because the temptation is too great. And if the kids are sitting in the backside, well, you know what? If you didn't buy a car, you couldn't maybe afford it, that had the video built into the back seats. I understand that. But now we have little monitors that will just hang over the driver's seat so the kids can still watch a video, or they have their tablets that they can watch. We don't have to feed live video to the infotainment system. Sometimes it's hard enough just letting somebody listening to a football game or a baseball game or a basketball championship game or something like that, and they get so tied up in the game, again, they're distracted.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah. And I don't want to get too far down on this particular topic, but the only thing I'll say is that, the automotive industry, like any other industry, is under enormous pressure to perform, to profit, to continuously innovate, and they're following the direction of their consumers. They're following what they think their consumers want, which is more of their personal data, their personal entertainment accessible to them within their vehicle. And we're entering this world of what we now call the software-defined vehicle, where your vehicle, rather than being this heavy asset, this mechanical way of getting you from point A to point B, is now sort of just like your phone. It becomes like a world that you define with the people that you want to talk to, the places you want to go, the media that you want to engage with. And so we can either shake our fist at that and watch the numbers continue to spike, or we can lean into taking advantage of the connectivity that's been deployed and use it to our advantage and actually use it for safety. And so that's what we think is the right path to do, is to take advantage of, this is one more D, we'll call it disconnected.
Right.
These drivers are not connected to what's happening around them. And that is what we want to do through digital alerting, is connect them to the fabric of responders and pedestrians that are sharing the road with them so that they can make better decisions.
Right. And I think that the concept of Hasselert and other companies involved in this is good. And we're trying to give them that warning in the system that they use virtually every moment that they're in the car, to get that little earlier warning, instead of waiting to come upon brake lights and flashing lights, but maybe a mile ahead, mile and a half, 2 miles ahead, they'll get that alert.
About half a mile ahead is
Half mile?
the way to do it. Yeah, and the reason why is specifically because of the fact that we only want to alert drivers that are imminently approaching, but we want to give them enough advance warning to where they can look for it, anticipate it, and then react to it. And so that's how safety cloud alerts are delivered, is, we are installed directly on the vehicle. When those flashing lights are activated, alerts are automatically going out. Today our alerts are reaching drivers, not just in navigation apps like Waze and Apple Maps. Now we're in the dashboard of Jeep, Dodge, Ram, and Chrysler vehicles, millions of vehicles nationwide. And there's more
wonderful.
OEMs that are coming on board. The reason why we alert on navigation apps, we actually have a very strong belief that ideally drivers should not be using their mobile devices when they're driving. They should not be having to use a third-party app. But we also want all drivers to be able to receive these alerts no matter what vehicle they're driving. And so, if you have an old Cadillac Seville and that's just your car, you ain't changing it, well, you still deserve to get alerts in your Cadillac Seville. And so now if you're using that navigation app, you're going to get advance warning. But the only way that we could have done this so far, the first movers on this were first responders on the ground, fleets like the Pennsylvania Turnpike and innovators like Todd, who were saying, you know what, this is not an either or, this is an everything and. We need as many tools and solutions and campaigns and efforts as possible to get these numbers down.
Yep.
Right. Jack, Todd, want to come in here?
Oh, the only thing I remind people is that digital alerting is just one tool in the toolbox.
Right.
And there's no one silver bullet out there that's going
Right.
to save lives. It's a system that has to work together and be constantly maintained to make sure that it works the way that it's supposed to. So, whether it's emergency lighting or cones on the highway, advanced warning signs, high visibility PPE, the digital alerting technology that's out there, the new technology available in emergency warning lights, all of those things are just one tool in the toolbox, and they've all got to work together in a system. And I guess what we're trying to do these days is identify which tools we don't have yet. There's probably some things that none of us have thought about. I had a meeting a couple of weeks ago with the folks that make Pierce fire trucks up in Wisconsin. And the purpose of the meeting was to talk about the future of fire apparatus safety, and in particular, how it relates to the safety of responders at incident scenes. And we had all kinds of ideas flying around that are not either technically possible yet, or from a manufacturing standpoint, not feasible from a financial standpoint. But there's more tools that are going to come on the market in the next few years that'll help on all this stuff. We've got to make sure that we're maintaining the system and not focusing on any one particular tool. they've all got to work
Right.
together in a synchronous way of some sort.
Right. Plus, public education is still going to be a key, because we can have all the best alerting systems. You could have one person sitting on top of your roof and just telling you, "Oh, pull over." But the fact is, if you don't have the buy-in from the public, then we're not going to get everybody. We know that. But if we can get a good portion of the public to buy into the concept that we're of promoting safety as much as we care about it, then we're looking for better successes.
And I think Brock mentioned education and enforcement. And we've talked about the move over laws that are in every state in the country. The problem is that the enforcement of those laws is not as routine as we wish it was. And part of that is because law enforcement is short on staff nationwide at this point. They don't necessarily have the ability to enforce the law as much as we'd like them to. Maybe what we need there is a solution for automatic enforcement without having to require another traffic stop, which then puts somebody else in harm's way again, just to cite somebody for not moving over.
Right.
If we have a law out there that's not enforced, then it's the same thing as anything else. If you don't enforce it, then is it really a law anymore?
Mm-hmm.
We need better enforcement of the move over laws, and people keep calling for more legislation, more rules, more this and more that. I think we've got all the tools in the toolbox we need to get drivers to do what they're supposed to do, but we've got to enforce those rules and regulations in order to get that message across in some way, shape, or form.
Right.
Yeah, and a challenge with the move over law is, we have 50 different states with 50 different laws. So if you travel from state to state, Pennsylvania has one law. I go into New Jersey, I'm supposed to do something else. I go into New York, I do something completely different there. And in some states, it's a slap on the wrist. It's a, $25, $50 fine and not really, it's a challenge. Yeah. It's, people are like, well, okay, I got a fine for it, but it's no deterrent for them to, for that fine. There's no real consequences. And I guess it's not just public awareness of these laws, but how do you make them care? How do you reach down and make them care that this is a problem? When the year in 2021, when we had 65 responders killed, a couple months before the end of the year, I had somebody ask me how many responders have been killed so far, and at the time I said 47, and his response back to me was, "Oh, that's not bad." And it's like, and I looked at him like incredulous, and it's like, "What do you mean it's not?" I said, "One's not." I said, "That's not." So that's not 47 individuals. I said, "That's 47 families, 47 communities, 40." I was hot. I was worked up, about this, and it's like, but in the grand scheme of things, if you look at those numbers, if you look at 65, if you look at 51, the public's not going to care about that, because it's not, unless they're personally affected by that. They're going to say, well, those are relatively low numbers because, it's not even 100, but it's, I have a group on Facebook that is National Highway Struck by Heroes, National Struck by Heroes. And it's a lot of the families that have lost a loved one, and you see what they're going through, but you see that they really didn't get involved or didn't really care about the move over law until they were personally affected by it. And I'm not, putting that down or anything, but we don't care unless we're affected by something. Now we're advocates for it, and that's great that we're advocates for it, but we need to be advocates for it before. It's like Jack, with the TIM training, Jack sees it, I see it all the time. I go out and do this TIM training, and when do people want to do TIM training? After something's happened. We just had an incident in Pennsylvania here in Adams County where a commercial vehicle drove through their incident scene. Who did I get a phone call from yesterday? We need to have TIM training. You need to have it before this. But yes, I will do the training for you. But why are we waiting until something happens? Why are we being reactive instead of proactive? And that's the same way how we have to reach the public and get them to be proactive in understanding these laws before something happens, rather than waiting till something happens and then have this big campaign. We need to have the money to spend. We need to have the organization to get the public to care and get that message out there.
Brock.
And I want to emphasize something that Jack said, because I think it's a really critical point for people to understand, which is that every time you write a ticket for somebody to move over, you haven't prevented a collision. What you've done is you've monetized their failure to move over. That's all you've done. And that's an important thing to do, because every single one of these agencies is hurting for resources. And one of the reasons why they're hurting for resources is, I mean, Todd, Jack, you know this better than anyone. Just hyper focusing on the fatalities is actually a really easy way to avoid the scope of this epidemic. When we look at the number of collisions that involve specialty vehicles that have some form of alerting, so that includes not just fire vehicles and law enforcement vehicles, that's tow truck and roadside assistance, that's work zones, that's school buses. When you add up all of those collisions involving all of those different sites and vehicles every year, you're looking at close to 300,000 collisions. Even if those don't lead to fatalities or injuries, for the agencies that operate those assets, that is billions of dollars in equipment and overtime compensation for people who have to fill the gaps for people who are out of office. It is having to share engines across multiple responding zones. It is for, again, these agencies that are already understaffed, under-resourced, overworked. And so when you zoom out and you look at the scope of this challenge, and how frequently these collisions actually occur, it's a miracle that there aren't more deaths, because they happen all the time, every day across the country.
Oh,
Yeah, Brock, let's talk about that for a minute, because it's really important when we've been following and tracking fatalities for me anyway, for 25 years. It's a shame that in 2023, we still don't have a federal government agency who can tell us how many close calls, how many struck by injuries, how many struck by fatalities, how many emergency vehicles have been struck and damaged or totaled, and the dollars and cents associated with all of those incidents.
Yes.
The Federal Highway Administration still depends on the Emergency Responder Safety Institute to provide data on just the struck by fatalities. And I can't find anybody else who could tell us the numbers of emergency responders who have been injured, sometimes seriously enough to prevent them from going back to work. I mean, we've had responders who have suffered amputations of limbs on some of these struck by incidents that don't get counted anywhere because nobody is actively tracking those incidents and can report them out. So we finally got cooperation from the Federal Highway Administration last year to put together a page on our website to track these struck by incidents and close calls. We're still trying to get the word out on that, but we've got to do a better job of explaining what the real problem is, which goes beyond the fatalities, like you said. And if we can put dollars and cents and the numbers of people who have been injured, the number of vehicles that have been totaled, that's going to tell a bigger story and a more complete picture of what's actually going on out there. Because you're right, just focusing on the fatalities is just not a big enough number to get a lot of people interested in the subject.
Right, right. All right. Well,
Yeah, I think Jack and I had that conversation earlier this year, when we were seeing the number of fire apparatus get struck. And, I said to Jack, I said, wonder how many millions of dollars, and Brock, you hit the nail on the head, billions and millions of dollars worth of fire equipment that's being damaged and destroyed with a 2-year waiting list to get a new piece of apparatus built or whatever.
3 to 4 years now.
3 or 4.
Yeah, and they say, well, you could pull another one out of reserve. Well, if it was a good piece of equipment, it wouldn't be a reserve piece. So communities are having to make do with less. And what's that? Like Brock said, if you're sharing an engine now off of 2 districts, what's the delay in response time? How many people are impacted, injured, or killed because we don't have that frontline piece of apparatus that we have? We don't have that tower or that ladder that could reach the heights that we need it to be because we've used it as a $1 million blocker piece that's going to get struck by somebody at an instant scene.
Right. I'm sure you and Jack, Brock, I don't know if you knew this, but for me, this all broke about, it's got to be probably 5 years ago now, with the down in Irving, Texas, where Irving had already had some of these issues. So they took their new tiller. There was an accident reported on one of the interstates. They put their tiller, their new 100-foot tiller out there at a good angle, safe angle for people, everything like that. And it probably was just, I think, a couple of moments after the last two firefighters walked away towards the help assisted the accident, a semi came in and totaled the tiller. Unfortunately, it took the life of the driver of the semi that hit it. And he had a brand new $1.4 million fire apparatus. Basically, was gone, knocked four firefighters off the apparatus. They were all injured, but all recovered and were able to return to duty. And I finally, through our mutual friend Steve from CVV, Steve Austin.
Steve Austin.
Austin, right? He put me in touch with the chief, and I had the chief on here, and he had a very powerful interview with me because what they had, he wasn't just talking as somebody on the sidelines just reading about an accident. This was his department, his people, his brand new apparatus. And that woke me up to the extent of this problem that I had not been aware of to that level until then. And then I've made it an important item that we have to deal with in this podcast. And this is probably a fourth or fifth episode of just talking about this issue. We had the webinar as well, and we're happy to commit to continue to educate, especially our first responders, because the vast majority of our listeners and viewers are first responders. Sure, there are buffs out there, but the vast majority are first responders. And we want to make sure that we're giving them the right information and good suggestions so that they can either bring it back to their department or ask somebody else about it, but at least get light the ember to let them add a little more flame to the fire by saying, wait a second, I didn't realize this was this bad. We got to do something about it, and maybe that will be a way that when we come back from the break, this could be a way that we can help motivate our listeners and viewers to play active parts in helping the cause in general, All right, folks, we're going to take a quick break here. If you're watching the video, you won't see anything change. It will all look the same to you. If you're listening to the audio podcast, well, as always, we're going to take a little break and we'll have a few public service announcements coming up. And when we come back, we'll be with our guests, Jack Sullivan, Todd Leiss, and Brock On, as we talk about the epidemic of struck-bys in this country and what we can do to lessen those numbers. So we'll be right back right after these words. As always, please stay tuned. Hello and welcome back to this episode of 5 Alarm Task Force. Another very important episode that we're presenting today, and that is we're talking about struck by accidents. Some are accidents. Some are just downright irresponsibility. I'm not going to sugarcoat it. There was something else I'd use, but I kind of keep those words off of this podcast because I know we have some younger fire buffs that like to listen to it. But if you're not totally attentive to your driving, and again, I don't care what road you're on, when you get in that vehicle, you put your seatbelt on, hopefully, you're at the helm of what could be a weapon. And in the same way that you would never think of wildly brandishing that weapon in a crowd, if you're not in control of your vehicle, and I don't mean just having two hands on the wheel, I mean attentive driving, knowing what you're doing every moment. If you're not attentive, then you're part of the problem. You're part of the problem that we're discussing today. So in this next segment, we're going to be talking about what you can do, ways to learn more, what you can do, where the industry is now. Yes, we have Brock here with us from Haas Alert, but remember, they're one team that's trying to help everybody. Okay, there are other teams out there. And we knew even several years ago when Chief Billy was in our first conversation about these incidents that the light manufacturers, emergency light manufacturers, wanted to come on board. And now we're hearing that they are on board, and they've worked hard to develop, and we're going to be talking about that. So we want you to know that there are teams of people all across this country, from our friends Jack and Todd and the other great people at the Responder Safety Institute. We have the people at Alert. We have people at the other manufacturing line. We have the car manufacturers involved. There are a whole lot of people who are trying to get both our minds and our hands around this problem and do what we can to protect you as a driver, our first responders, other citizens driving or walking along the road, whatever. We're a team all trying to work together. So nobody is asserting blame on anyone or anything except if you are a distracted driver. And if you're listening to this and you hear that phrase, you already know if you are or not. Now, Todd brought up a great point, and Jack, that if you're talking on your cell phone and in a long conversation, you might be more attentive to that conversation than you are to what's going on the roadway. And that's not good. So, gentlemen, let's talk about now, what can we do and what can the public do to learn more, to be part of the solution rather than part of the problem? And Brock, I'm going to start with you because you're in the industry, but you also know your colleagues that are out there. And I want our listeners and viewers to see that, we're not promoting anybody over anybody else. We're just talking about the people, we're with some of the people who are working hard to lessen the tragedy of struck-bys.
That's right. Well, happy to speak to that. So first of all, let me just again borrow from Jack. There is no silver bullet. If there was a one easy thing that everyone could do to solve this problem, we would have figured that out 25, 30, 40 years ago. It takes a village, it takes an effort, and it takes a lot of redundant overlapping efforts to really ensure safety, especially with the diversity of incidents that occur. There's certainly steps that the responders are taking for best, for Tim's training and best practices around that. And Todd and Jack can certainly speak to that. Drivers obviously should always be obeying the slow down, move over laws. And that is an easy way to ensure that you are doing the right thing when you're on the road. Just follow the law as it's written and you'll be just fine. I will say from the industry perspective, what's happening now is frankly a cause for hope. There's a massive change happening on the road today, and that is that we now have the tools, the technology, and the capabilities to leverage connectivity for improved safety. And so the best way I can define this, and it occurs to me we haven't talked about this, but the best way to look at digital alerting is it's the way that emergency alerting is going to work in the era of connected vehicles. And light bars are always going to play a role. Sirens are always going to play a role. Tim's training, education, enforcement will always play a role. But now we know how to get data from these hazards into the drivers' vehicles to tell them to slow down and move over. The automotive industry is undergoing two primary shifts right now. They are electrifying, which is a massive investment and a massive sea change in their business model, and they are exploring autonomy. We are certainly at least 5 to 10 years away from meaningful deployment of truly autonomous vehicles on the road. And so what we are doing, I can at least speak for Alert, is using the tool of digital alerting, which uses cellular networks to reach drivers in the vehicles that they're driving today, which is a critical component of this. And then helping autonomous vehicle companies understand that digital alerting can help autonomous vehicles literally see where hazards are on the road when they are out of line of sight. Because this is a challenge that regular drivers deal with in addition to autonomous drivers is that, you can't see these hazards. And so there's a lot of exciting work being done and around the work of using something like digital alerting to make these hazards much more conspicuous, not just for everyday drivers, but for the future of vehicles. And then the other thing I'll say is that we've worked very, very hard at HosAlert to make our digital alerting safety cloud as easy to adopt as possible. So what does that mean? That means that you can either buy our service and install it aftermarket on any apparatus you own, doesn't matter the make or model, it's universally adaptable. Or if you've already invested in something like a cradle point or some kind of tracking system, oftentimes we offer a direct integration with a system like that so that you don't even have to buy our hardware. You can just activate it on what you've already done. We benefit from exceptional partnerships with leading manufacturers. We've talked about Pierce, Rosenbauer, Seagrave, Fraser. All of these manufacturers offer Safety Cloud digital alerting pre-installed and pre-activated on new custom apparatus. So when you're getting a new apparatus, you're already protected right out of the gate. In addition to that, we've priced digital alerting. It is cheaper than analog alerting. This will be less expensive than the light bar you're used to buying. So our vision here is that digital alerting should be ubiquitously available. It should be accessible to all of these departments. And then last year, we started launching direct engagements and partnerships with leading light bar manufacturers like Whelan, names like Highvis. We are doing everything we can to make it so that digital alerting is just embedded within the first responder industry, and it just comes standard so that responders can benefit from this protection without having to take a lot of extra steps or invest a lot of extra resources.
That's great. And I told you this the first time we met online here, was that I've been using Waze for a long time because Waze originally came from Israel. It was developed in Israel.
Nice.
And we're very big proponents. Plus, we think now we turn out that our cousin may have played a role. He's very high up in the well, he's supposedly officially retired, but
Sure.
from Israeli intelligence, you don't ever really get to retire 100%. So he still
You've already said too much.
Yeah, he gets a phone call every once in a while.
Sure.
But I've used it, and one of the things I really liked about it, especially if I was driving with my wife or one of my daughters who was in town at that point, because they were both out of town, but is that with the Waze, you can have if you see something on the highway, like there's a police car moving out, there's a fire truck, there's an accident, there's a broken down vehicle, you can Waze, provided you don't, not as the driver, but your passenger could just touch the dashboard or your phone if it was right there in the middle between the two of you, and put a report on there that goes to all Waze drivers in that area that there is an accident up ahead, or you got to move over ahead because there's construction in the way. And I found that, again, having been a first responder, I would have loved to have seen that instead of in 1977, 78, because it makes so much sense. I'm just taking technology out of it. It makes so much sense for being able to, those people on the roads to be able to report a problem on the road.
Sure.
Instead of waiting for a radio, the guy in the helicopter from the radio station, hi, this is Big Bud and the Green Machine, and we're telling you that on 95. Instead of waiting for that,
we've really benefited from the fact that Waze helped to condition drivers before we were around to the concept of being alerted to something ahead within a navigation app like that. We've since learned that HosAlert is the largest external data source in Waze's navigation system. The difference between our data and other data is that other data is crowdsourced, the way that you've identified, and our data comes direct from the source of authority, which is these emergency vehicles that have it equipped. And so, again, we want to get to a world where drivers aren't using their phones. They're not, fumbling around and trying to place what they're doing is they're just getting communicated to. Again, the work that Jack and Todd and all of these responders are doing fundamentally comes down to how do we get the attention of drivers to let them know that there's something ahead that you're not expecting and you need to watch out for? That is the problem that we want to solve.
Brock, we had a solution for that back in the 70s and 80s. They were CB radios.
Right.
Sure.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And they did the same job, and they were pretty effective at it too, because I spent a lot of time driving around on business trips on a regular basis, and it was not hard to get information about what was going on in Pennsylvania at a certain mile marker by radio. So it didn't involve a whole lot of interaction with an app or anything like that. You just had to keep your ears open and listen.
Yep, that was very good in those days. I really liked that. And again, as a first responder, and using that, it benefited me, because if I was traveling with my wife, and there were plenty of times we were traveling together that something came up and we heard it on the CB, and I said, okay, honey, I'm going to be pulling over, just, help me out if I need anything. And she was ready for it. Yeah, it was there. And I you know what? They still have them, but I think I don't know. I think maybe people want to be entertained more today than they want to communicate with each other.
Mhm.
I think we've seen
I thought the CB was pretty entertaining back in the day.
Oh, I loved it.
Yeah, no, I was actually going to say, I actually think that you couldn't have TikTok without CB radio. I think that everything has just gotten much more advanced.
Right.
It's another form of communication. And you're right. People take their work with them. They take their email with them. They take their families with them. You can FaceTime anybody you want. We have to meet the world where it meets us.
Right.
To a certain degree. And so we can either work with the tools available to us. It's like if you, again, I'll say it again, if you can pump Netflix into a car, you can pump emergency alerts in there too. It's just a matter of, do we want to do it? And how do we make it effective? And so we're committed to seeing that happen. But once again, I think that as much, obviously at Hosler, we will always be vocal proponents. The other big thing that's happening this year that I might add is that there's federal funding in the infrastructure bill that was passed 2 years ago for digital alerting. And that funding is now becoming available to state highway safety offices this year.
Oh, wow.
And so
That's
this
great.
is the big shift that Hosalert has tried to initiate. All the money that our government is spending and innovating and researching the study of connected vehicles, we are trying to funnel that to fund safety and protection for first responders with tools that communicate with vehicles, right?
Yeah.
And it's helping them understand that if you really want to roll out connected vehicles nationwide, start with the one thing that unifies all of these communities. They all have first responders. They all need protection on the side of the road. And what other justification do you have to push data into a vehicle than for safety? Right. Frankly, there isn't any other data you should be pushing into a vehicle. Now,
Right.
I'll leave that to the automakers. But my point is that, we are in a space now where, we can really let first responders essentially be the catalyst for connected vehicles in this country in a way that prioritizes safety first. And that's what we want to see happen. Having said all of that, digital alerting is once again just one piece of this. And so, I think Jack and Todd can speak to the other actions that responders should be taking and communities ought to be taking to address this problem beyond digital alerting.
Okay. Jack, we'll turn it over to you and Todd.
Well, I guess I would start out by saying that I think the respondersafety.com website is probably the only comprehensive website available right now on specifically the subject of roadway incident safety, traffic incident management. We have taken everything that we've learned in the last 25 years on this subject and put it on the website, available to all for free. There isn't anything on the website that costs anybody anything. It's all been done with grant money that we've been able to secure through a lot of hard work by people on our team, from the U.S. Fire Administration, from FEMA, from the Federal Highway Administration, from a variety of other sources. And the vast majority of work has been carried out by volunteers who are doing the creation of a lot of the training programs that are available and the content on the website at no charge. So what we've been able to collect in 25 years is represented on the website. We've got training, we've got reference and resources related to research that's been done on the various topics. We have a section of the website devoted to public education and community risk reduction. And we've got a section of the website that we try to track as many of these struck by incidents as we possibly can and share news related to the subject with people in the business. So the first thing that I would recommend to people, if you're interested in this subject and looking for resources, respondersafety.com is a good place to go and just peruse what's available. The other thing I mentioned earlier in the program was that we're starting to spend more time and effort on the idea of community risk reduction and trying to get the subject of emergency services working on the highway into the community risk reduction conversation, which for years has been driven by fire prevention and child safety seats and swimming pool safety and things like that. We've added one more subject to community risk reduction in roadway incident safety and traffic incident management. And we've got a number of resources that we've made available, handout material and things like that, PSAs, public safety announcements that can be used in a variety of different ways, including on social media posts and things like that, community meetings and various things. They're all available on the website for download for free and to use as people can see fit in whatever operation they've got available to them. And then last year we started to track these struck by incidents with the webpage that was integrated into the respondersafety.com website. You can also get to it by using reportstruckby.com. Will take you directly to the reporting page. It takes about 4 minutes to report on a struck by incident or close call. And anybody can do it. It's open to everyone. We're taking as much information as we possibly can. And we're working in the background to get a team of people who will sort through all this information to make sense out of it and share it with folks who are interested in this subject, primarily emergency responders, but others that need to hear it too. So we've been working really hard for the last couple of years trying to ramp up our data collection efforts. But the best place to start is the website. That will take you, if you're interested, to training that's available through the Responder Safety Learning Network. We've got about 45 different modules on all aspects of roadway incident safety available to anyone for free. There is still a lot of benefit to having face-to-face instructor-led training in classroom-type environments where we can facilitate tabletop exercises and things like that and promote discussion. But we also know there's a whole lot of people in the business and emergency services who can't get to those training classes in some cases or don't have them available in their area. These online training modules are the next best thing to get the information and share it with them. Most of the modules can be completed somewhere between 20 and 40 minutes. They are tested. A certificate is issued when you successfully pass the module, so it can be used to supplement your training records. And we've covered an awful lot of topics on the Responder Safety Learning Network that are not covered in the 4-hour National Traffic Incident Management Training Program that Federal Highway put out almost 10 years ago at this point, or 10 years ago at this point. So there's a lot of subjects that are not included in that 4 hours worth of training that are addressed in the various modules that we've put together on the Responder Safety Learning Network. So there's tons of resources. I don't think you're going to find a more comprehensive collection of resources related to this subject anywhere else on the internet. We continue to build and add to it on a regular basis. And we're always looking for ideas and help. You know, if people want to contribute time or money to try and help make some of these things happen and give us ideas or suggestions on what they think we should have done that they haven't seen yet, we're always interested in that kind of input.
Great. Thank you, Jack. Todd?
Yeah, following up on what Jack said, we're always looking for help. We're always looking for subject matter experts at respondersafety.com. We could use your assistance, even if you have an article that you write that may be interesting for responders in roadway safety. Get it to us. We could put some content on the website. I guess the one thing, Steve, I want to mention, be the voice. We can't just sit back and be passive. We have to get out there and get your voice heard and tell everybody about struck bys and what is they say this squeaky wheel. Sometimes you gotta be that squeaky wheel to get out there and share with everything and everybody, family, friends, and keep hammering that message until people are tired of hearing it and sometimes you have to be blunt. You know, I put some emails out that to my email list that sometimes very blunt and says, get off your ass and do something instead of just sitting there and waiting for somebody else to do it. And you know, I did that because I was frustrated one day and sent out a message like that. And I got more responses back from people saying, yes, that's what we need to hear. Yes, thank you for speaking up. And yeah, it's you know, I had reached the point of you know, I'm tired of people, you know, and social media is great, but social media also, you hear so many people complain about nobody's doing anything, but what are you doing? And when you question somebody and ask them what they're doing, well, nothing. It's like, well, then you're part of the problem. You're not part of the solution if you're not going to speak up and help out and be this, you know. And you know, I was told in sixth grade, and I tell this story quite a bit, by one of my teachers, when I handed a paper into him, I said, is this good enough? And the teacher said to hand it back to me and said, good enough is the enemy of your best. And that stuck with me since then. So, you know, sixth grade, you know, and the rest of my life now, every time I think I'm doing something and is this good enough? And I think, well, I'm tired. I've worked, you know, 80 hours, 100 hours this week. This is good enough. No, it's not good enough. It's not my best. So I got to go back. So that's what we have to think about when we're talking about responder safety, and what we're doing is this the very best we could do for our responders? And if it's not, then shut up, get to work, and make it happen and get it done. And that there's no shortcuts to safety. You know, when we're out there, all of us, it's human nature that we want to take shortcuts, but when we take shortcuts to safety, we're getting our personnel and getting responders hurt. So we got to do everything. We got to use all the tools, the digital alerts, the signs, the message boards, the proper PPE, you know, the training. You know, I said to last night doing my training, a 4-hour class, and we got done at 10:30 at night. And I said, this training is useless if you go out there and you don't do anything with it. I know. Well, I mean, you got to look at me for 4 hours, which is, hey, that's a plus. But I mean, other than that, it's you know, it's you. If you don't incorporate anything that I've taught you or anything that we learned, and as I go through the class, we talk about doing your training night. Do this. Put your high vis vest on and go out and stand next to your apparatus. Look at the technology that we have up at this table that you could do. If you don't incorporate any of that, then you're doing yourself and you're doing your crew members, you're doing your family a disservice. And if you don't want to wear your high vis and you don't want to do any of these things for yourself, think about your family that you're going to let behind when something happens to you.
Yeah, there's no doubt about that. You know, this is what our nonprofit, we started right in the middle of the pandemic, is that we knew that we were losing brothers and sisters who were leaving families because they were doing their job and they did what they were supposed to do, but it cost them. And so we raised funds and we started making donations to families of brothers and sisters who either made the ultimate sacrifice or were severely injured. And matter of fact, I just reached out to my two members of the board who are also firefighters, well known, Andy Starnes and Nick Higgins, today for the Philadelphia firefighter who was severely injured in the fall. And he has a wife and a couple of young kids. So we're going to wait to hear back, but we're going to probably reach out and give them a cash donation that we do through sending a check to the right representative. And that's because we saw the need to do this. And yeah, there are federal agencies and local agencies, but we didn't see anything coming from the fire service itself. Yes, we know that there are payments and stuff like that. And yes, a lot of people use GoFundMe and for these families, and that's wonderful. And any of you who have donated to a GoFundMe to help the family of a severely injured or a firefighter who made the ultimate sacrifice, thank you. Thank you for those donations, because you just may not know just what that means to that family. And so we thank you for that. But we also know that we can't just be one side. We have to cover lots of bases at the same time. It's like trying to cover all 9 positions in baseball with just one person. Maybe it was fun when we were kids and we were just playing wiffle ball and only 5 of us there. So we had to take up 3 teams with five people, but it was fun. But this, we're not talking about as fun. This is our lives are in the balance here. And Jack and Todd have provided us, sadly, with the kind of numbers that are the real numbers, not that are being manufactured and blown out of proportion. They're not overly stated. They're not understated. This is what we know. We know.
Truly.
And
Well,
we need that help.
Yeah, I mean, and the only thing that I would add to that is that we hear it at Hosler from firefighters all the time, and it was shocking to me when the first time I heard it, as someone who didn't have a background in emergency response, to hear a firefighter say, "I would much rather go into a burning building any day of the week than work on the side of the road." And it's very simple. We know how to control a fire, but we don't have total control over what's happening on the road. Right. And this is exactly what Jack and Todd are saying. It's like, there is no golden, there is no silver bullet for this. The answer is do everything you can consistently, safely, by the book, and make sure that you're doing everything you can in your community to ensure that everyone else knows what they can do. Hopefully those of us who are working on the periphery in conjunction with our partners here can really help to add value and enhance the work that you're doing by taking that work and getting it in front of the faces of the average everyday public who
Right.
looking at other things. And I firmly believe that we're going to see sooner than later a sea change in this, with now that all of these efforts are really, really starting to come together. I will say that the work that the Responder Institute has done on this has been a transformative effort. Every single agency that we work with, even whenever we are, typically when agencies come on board with us, they do things like press releases and they announce to their community, they're alerting. And when news stations come to me and say, like, you guys are making these claims about like the reduction of risk and how big the problem is, all I have to do is point them to the Responder Safety Institute. Just tell them to go to Responder Safety, and it's all there for them. And it
Right.
wasn't, and that's something that is a critical gap that's been filled. So it is not only a mistake, but it's frankly incorrect to convince ourselves that this is a hopeless battle. It's the opposite.
That's great to hear. That's great to hear. And yes, we want to encourage you, especially if you're a first responder, since most of our listeners are first responders, that you need to play a proactive role in this as well, in your community, with your department. Okay, tell them, I listened to this podcast, and I went to. We're going to put the link for Respond to Safety and Oz Alert in the show notes for you. But you need to do what you can. Do your own due diligence. Okay, you're today we're self-advocates for medical care. We're self-advocates for this and that. You need to be an advocate in your community, a self-advocate, to bring safety to your community, to your colleagues in the three branches of public safety, the three main branches in a smaller community. And then remember that you travel on the turnpikes or the interstates, you have numerous communities involved as you make your way on these roads, and they too deserve to have knowledgeable drivers on their roads within their communities who know about the situation and doing what they can to help mitigate it, whether it's by taking even if they're not a first responder, but a citizen going to respondosafety.com and learning about some of these protocols that they can learn about and what has to be done. Whether you ask your community to hold a public meeting, a public session about, okay, can we have a sound off session about what are we doing to protect our firefighters when they're responding on these roadways? How do we, and our citizens, it's not just our firefighters, but how do we prevent our drivers in our city to take care, to be, and you have to be an advocate. You have to be part of the solution, because if you're not part of the solution, silence is just as loud as if you're not abiding by the traffic rules.
Yep.
So we need you to help us and help these three gentlemen and their colleagues and the industries that they're all connected to make driving and responding and letting people who come to take care of, because accidents and collisions will continue to happen. We know that. but we can be better prepared, that we know in advance if there's one ahead of us. So we slow down in time without having to slam on our brakes and possibly resulting in another collision. And we know what to expect from the learning we've done through these various sources. So I hope that the messages that my guests today have shared with us is going to be one that you take to heart. If you're listening to this now or you're watching the video on YouTube when it comes out, we hope that you're going to be, number one, interested in what you see. Check the links that we provide for you in the show notes of where to go to learn more, and then play an active part. If you have an idea for the Responder Safety Institute, let them know about it. They'd be happy to listen to a new idea. You have an idea for Haas Alert or any of the other, let them know about it. Drop them an email. They'd like to hear that. They want to hear what other people are thinking about, not just the same groups that they deal with all the time. They want to hear outsiders, and they want to hear, what does it mean to you if we were able to do this? And will this help you? Will it be a hindrance? We want to make sure, it's like we say when we ask people to give us feedback, we say, we want constructive criticism because we want to know that we're bringing you the programming that you want to listen to or watch. Otherwise, we're wasting our time doing the podcast. If we're bringing you the good stuff, let us know we're bringing you the good stuff. And if there's something that we've missed that you think is important, let us know. And that's happened, and we've brought those shows together. This is one of those topics that's so important. And while we have seen this slight downturn, which thank goodness has occurred, we want to make sure that we keep the numbers as low as we possibly can. Through our efforts, through the efforts of people like Haas Alert and the other manufacturers who are on board now, this is how we come together to protect our communities by creating a greater community of interest. And that's what we have to do. And hopefully we've done that today. We've piqued your interest with our podcast today. So to my three guests, Jack Sullivan and Todd Leiss and Brock Alm, thank you, gentlemen, for taking time out of what I know are busy schedules, busy days. I know, Todd, you just said you've been teaching, got more to do. Jack's teaching, he's more to do. And Brock, you're always busy with Corey. And please give Corey our very best.
Of course.
But we really thank the work that all of you are doing and for taking the time to share it with our viewers and our listeners. And we just hope that this message will ring true for many of you and that you'll be a part of it. And also, Jack wanted us to, we'll put this in the show notes also, but his email directly is respondersafety@gmail.com. And we'll also give you their couple of their social media handles so that you can follow them on Twitter or Instagram. And we'll have that in the show. We'll have those in the show notes as well. So gentlemen, thank you very, very much. Sincere appreciation for everything you do, besides taking a few minutes to help us. And I really treasure every moment that I'm sitting here and learning with you, because that's one of the greatest rewards of this podcast, is to learn with my guests, and hopefully share that with our listeners, our viewers. So folks, if you're watching the video, this will be the conclusion. If you're listening to the audio, yep, you know what's going to happen again. We'll take a break, have a few messages, and we'll be right back after that. But for the video, thank you for tuning in, folks. We really appreciate it. Please do become part of the solution, because the more parts to the solution we have, the faster it's going to come about, the less people will be hurt and lose their lives, and we'll be driving in a safer atmosphere, hopefully in the not too distant future. So thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back with another podcast in the following week. Thanks for tuning in, and we'll be back soon. To all of you, stay safe, stay well, and let's make sure everyone goes home. Bye-bye now.